Hey everyone, this is Craig with NGP Van. I am here with Sri, and this is for our webinar called Relational Organizing. We're going to do some introductions in just a second. I just wanted to get to a little bit of housekeeping. We have quite a few people registered to attend, so they're just entering the webinar now, so we will give it a moment or two for people to join. In the meantime, if you can, there is closed captioning, I believe, automatically available. You can hit that button on the Zoom chat bar, not the chat bar, sorry, the Zoom control bar. You can go into more and do closed captioning if anyone needs that. Also, we have a chat box and a Q&A area. So if you have questions about the content that we are going to present today, pop that into the Q&A and we will answer them as we go along. So as Sri is chatting, I'll be looking at the questions. If there's a really good question that's very timely, I might interrupt Sri and just ask him to answer a question that you have. Please put those in the Q&A. If you have just general chatter, that can go into the web chat. And let's do that now. So if everyone can hear me okay, just let me know that you can hear me okay. And then tell us who you are, who you're with, and where you're at in the country. So I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm going to drop that in the chat in just a moment. And if you're able, just tell us who you are and where you are and drop that in the chat real quick so we can have a nice, engaging webinar. A couple other quick points. We are recording this. So once this is done, we will, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Karen, for the notes. Thank you, Sam. Once this webinar is done, what we typically do is we put captioning in it, and then we turn it into a video, and we will send you a link of a replay of that video. Sometimes we pop them on YouTube. Sometimes we just send it in an email. Either way, everyone who is here or everyone who registered will get a copy of the deck that's being presented right now in PDF format, and you'll get a link to the replay video. So don't worry about taking notes, just kind of sit back, relax, pay attention. And we've got some great content and some great material here, best practices for relational organizing. So without further ado, I want to introduce Sri Kulkarni. Sri and I had the opportunity to work together during a congressional race a couple of years ago. He's a fantastic person and has been really going around the country chatting about relational organizing for some time now. So I don't want to butcher his introduction, so I'll let him explain that himself. But there's some great content. We're really excited to present this. So I will turn it over to Sri and let him take it from there.
Can you hear me, Craig?
We can, loud and clear.
Okay. You're present. Well, first of all, thank you very much for that introduction. Really excited. We have so many people on the line today. Again, my name is Sri Kulkarni. If you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself and where you're from in the chat, do that. If you could also, just for level setting, I'd like to know what organization or campaign and what your role is, and who here is actually experienced with relational organizing, who's brand new. Has anybody here trained with me before? I saw some people from Texas who had RSVP'd. Super excited to see y'all back here again. Just to clarify, some of you who may have trained with me before, this is not a technical presentation on one specific platform. In fact, I've done many trainings with the platform Reach before, and we can touch on specific platforms at the end. But this presentation today is really about relational organizing and how it fits into a campaign strategy and the entire philosophy of relational organizing. So with that, I'd like to give you a little bit of background of how I came to be here. So you can see on the next slide, my background. As Craig mentioned, I ran for Congress in 2018 and 2020. And when I first started out, I didn't know anything about relational organizing. In fact, we backed into this because in our district, there was very low turnout, specifically from immigrant groups. And we started reaching out to these groups, campaigning in multiple languages. In fact, we eventually campaigned in 27 different languages, which we became nationally recognized for. But what we found was that campaigning in multiple languages was really just using the relationships, the networks that we had within these immigrant communities to increase turnout. And we did. We more than doubled Asian American turnout using the types of methods and types of strategies that we're going to talk about today. After that, I went to Georgia and helped with the Senate runoff for John Ossoff, where we built really the first statewide relational organizing network, specifically for increasing turnout in that election back in January of 2021, which of course we won. And then I came back here to Texas, or came back to Texas to create a statewide continuous relational organizing network across the entire state, which we built to over 500,000 voters. So that's kind of how I got to this point. Like I said, I raised tons of money. I looked at what was effective and wasn't effective. And to me, this is going to be the nuclear fusion of organizing, of campaigns, of everything that we do going forward. But before we talk about that, I just want to ask a question now, and people put your answers in the chat. What do you think the goal of a campaign is? Just anything you think the goal of your campaign is, assuming that everybody here works on campaigns. I know there's a mix of consultants and candidates, county parties, but what do you think the goal of a campaign is? I just want to see a few answers there. Win, elect more Democrats, get the right people elected, get elected. All right, here is my answer to what the goal of a campaign is. So my answer to the goal of a campaign is change voter behavior to increase vote share. And the reason I say it's important to state this at the outset is because sometimes we can confuse our objectives. A lot of times we think that the best campaign is what? The one who raised the most money. Usually that's the number one metric that we have, because more money means more ads, which means more name recognition. But the best campaign is the one which gets more votes than your opponent, obviously. Sometimes that coincides with TV ads or mailers. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes that coincides with the most doors knocked. Sometimes that coincides with the most money raised, but sometimes it doesn't. And many times we'll find that there is no correlation. In fact, I say this as someone who did raise a lot of money. In 2020, I outraised my opponent by almost $4 million. We had a 3-to-1 advantage on my opponent, the biggest money disparity in the entire state of Texas, in one of the most expensive races in the country. It was a $23 million congressional race. That year, we had 9 congressional candidates who outraised their Republican opponent. None of us won our races. But you know who came the closest to winning? The candidate with the smallest money advantage in Dallas, Candace Valenzuela. So if you look at competitive races from local to national, you'd be shocked at the number of times the electoral outcome does not correlate with the amount of money raised. And I honestly think it's the biggest myth in politics. If our goal is to actually win elections, we need to start by counting backwards. We need to determine how many votes we would lose by if we literally did nothing, and then work back from there. That is the impact of your entire campaign. Now, some people may say, well, that's really hard to determine, right, Craig? We talk about win numbers and how unscientific they are. Well, there's a saying in the military, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. Once you know what you're trying to achieve, then you can make a plan for using your limited resources to maximize your chances. So let me ask another question here. What would you say are the 3 primary resources that any campaign has? Anybody, just put your answers in the chat. What would you say the top resource people have? Volunteers, people, money, time. I think those are great answers. So here are my answers. The top 3 resources that any campaign has are time, money, and networks, right? And to be honest, time actually translates into money because it's how we raise our money, right? Money, unless you're self-funded, that is a finite resource. You have to decide how to spend that money. Networks is the part that we underutilize in campaigns. In fact, we do use our networks, right? Craig, how do we use our networks? We use our networks to ask for money, right? As a candidate, I know that was the first thing I was told to do, is call everybody in my Rolodex, in my phone book, and ask them for money.
Some campaigns, it's the only thing they do.
That's exactly right. However, does anybody ever ask you to use that Rolodex, to use your networks to get votes? This is the main topic that we're talking about today. How do we leverage our own networks, not just to raise money, but to actually win on election day? So let's take the first of those resources. sorry, the second one on this screen. What is it that we actually spend our money on? What do we spend our money on? What's the number one thing we spend our money on? But you can put your answer in the chat. The number one thing we spend our money on writ large is ads. Ads, yes, I see Catherine put it out there, ads, right? And in my campaign, it was TV. And the biggest campaigns, it's almost always TV ads, big TV ads everywhere, digital ads, mailers, right? So let me ask you a question. Say we have 3 voters here. Remember, our goal is to change their behavior so we can increase our win share. Aisha, Brianna, Carla. So the first one, Aisha, she gets an ad, a YouTube ad on her phone saying, vote for Craig. You know, Craig's the best. You know, Sri's awful. And she decides whether to click or skip or not. Brianna gets an unknown call, probably from some volunteer of yours. And what if it pops up on her phone as likely scam? Carla, on the other hand, gets a call or text message from her cousin Maria. Just using common sense, who do you think that we are most likely to change the behavior of those 3 people, Aisha, Brianna, or Carla? Carla, right, exactly, because it's the strength of that relationship. Obviously, that's going to have Maria, her cousin, is going to have a much bigger impact on her than an unknown call or an ad that she can just click through and skip. But most of what we spend our money on is on the first part. We think that's the only way to get to people. So let me ask you a question. How red, and you know, if you're in a nonpartisan race, this can apply too, but let's just ask this question: how red is your district? Assuming that we're trying to flip a district, right? Do you know what you're starting with, your baseline? This is a chart of how red Texas is. Now, how many people think that Texas is a completely red state? Some of us from Texas have said that as well. This chart is exactly how red Texas was last year. Now, I want you to just look at those segments for a second. You see the red segment there? That's how many people voted Republican in November of 2022. The blue segment is how many people voted Democrat. They look pretty close, right? Now, a lot of people say it's voter registration. Voters registration is a huge problem in Texas. In fact, they make it very hard to register. That's that yellow slice right there, 1.39 million people. However, what is the largest slice here of this electorate? The majority in Texas. It's that green slice, people who didn't vote. What do we spend almost all of our money on, almost all of our resources, our time on? Trying to move that line back and forth between the blue and the red segments. What do you think is harder? Getting someone who's already voting, but in that red slice who voted for Trump, to flip over into the blue slice, or to get someone in the green slice who just hasn't cared, who has been busy with their life, to show up? Well, my case to you is that it's going to be a much better use of our resources to try and get those other people to show up than to try and flip somebody over to our side. Now, some people have argued, well, you can't really do anything about that green slice, right? Those people, they're not going to vote anyway. You just got to take what you've got and do whatever you can to persuade people. How do you think turnout actually affects winning margin? Now, like I said, you may all have very different districts, but my district that I'm talking about here is the state of Texas. So I just want to show you a chart really quick of turnout and win margin. Look at this. This is over 4 election cycles from 2010 all the way to 2022. Look at those 2 graphs right there. Look at the turnout at the top, and you can see our turnout in Texas is pretty pathetic. We've been in the bottom 5 my entire life. 38%, 33%, right? When the turnout goes down, 33.7% in 2014, look at what the Republican win margin was there, 20.4%. That is completely out of the realm of possibility, right? We're a hopelessly red state. Look at 4 years later. When we increased the turnout to 53%, what did Texas become? 2.6%. Is that a red state, y'all? No, that is a purple state. That is absolutely a purple state. So you can see the curve of these 2 lines. They're literally a mirror image of each other. They're a mirror image of each other. So we actually can change turnout. And if we think about the things that can impact turnout, then what we can do is we can change those fundamental numbers. We're not just trying to flip someone who was voting Trump over to our side. We are actually changing the denominator, that green slice, the biggest slice in low turnout districts like the state of Texas. And by the way, if you're running in a nonpartisan race right now, or you're managing a nonpartisan race, a local election, say this November or off cycle, what do you think that green slice looks like for your race? Well, I can tell you in Texas in May for the school board elections and local elections, that green slice is almost the whole pie. It's about 90% of the entire pie. And so we need to attack that green slice. And that's what relational organizing is most powerful at. It's getting into that green slice. It's getting to those people who didn't have a reason to vote before, and using something other than an ad, other than an unknown person, using a relationship, some kind of connection that they have with someone else. So we talked about how our money is spent. How do we spend our time? How do we spend our time? So how do candidates spend their time? What's the number one thing that candidates spend their time on? Raising money. I did it myself. 40 hours a week of call time, just raising money, raising money, raising money. That's your number one job, right? How do volunteers spend their time? Well, they show up and you give them a list of people to call, a list of people to knock on their doors. But the key thing is they're all strangers. So what I'm going to argue to you is, one, I was told again and again, the number one thing that only a candidate can do is ask for money. That is not true. I found out very late in my campaign, there's a lot of people around the country. There are people like Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer who could ask for money from me and have it rain from the sky. The one thing that only a candidate can do, however, is to get volunteers to be ride or die for you, to actually give their heart and soul, their blood, sweat, and tears to this campaign. With volunteer time, what we're doing most of the time is we're treating every single volunteer the same. We're treating them like they're manual labor. You have 6 hours here. You go knock on these doors for 6 hours, or you call these people for 6 hours. However, my argument is there's a better way to use their time as well, because each volunteer brings a unique set of relationships. They bring a unique network to your campaign, but we're not taking advantage of it. So let me ask you, we talked about how we spend our money. We talked about how we spend our time. How do we leverage those relationships that people have? How do we leverage our networks? Does anybody have if anybody has a good example of leveraging a network, put it in the chat right now. So what I would argue to you is that there are two main ways that we should be leveraging our networks. So first off, has anybody done sales? Has anybody done real estate? Anything where you have to call up people and get them to change their behavior? Anybody who's done sales before, what's more impactful? What is more valuable to you? A cold call or a warm lead?
Always a warm lead.
Always a warm lead. Anybody in sales will tell you a warm lead is worth 10 cold calls. But almost everything that we ask people to do is cold calls, just calling up strangers. And you know, I noticed this because in my own campaign, my first primary, I had people who were calling every single day. And when I would look in their phones, I realized there were people in their phones who still hadn't voted, but they were calling strangers all over town. I said, please call the people that you know first. Those are warm leads before you get to the cold calls. We have tons and tons of warm leads that we were never utilizing in the campaign. The second thing is affinity groups. So what do I mean by affinity groups? So for example, if I have a group of students who want to help volunteer for me, if I have a couple of students, do you think the first thing I should do is send them to a retirement home and get them to walk around the retirement home trying to change people's behavior? No, I want to know who are the other students that they know, who are the 18 to 22-year-olds, because almost none of them are voting. They have an affinity group with their school. Or for example, if I have a Pakistani volunteer who comes up and says, I want to support your campaign, do you think I should just send them to an African-American neighborhood and knock randomly on doors? No, I want to ask them which other Pakistanis they know, because immigrants vote in low numbers. This is what we mean by affinity groups. In my own campaign, we actually focused on these groups. We were told not to reach out to them because these were low propensity groups, right? And the easiest way to lose an election is to talk to people who don't vote. But what we found was these groups were very tightly knit. And so I'll give you one example. There's a sect of Islam called Ismaili Muslims. It's a very small sect worldwide, but there was a concentration of them in Houston and in our district. There's about 3,000 of them. They started relationally organizing themselves, using their network, the entire group, calling each other in Urdu, and they all knew each other. By relationally organizing that affinity group, we got the Smiley turnout up to 83% for an immigrant group. And so, I mean, this is what I'm going to argue to you, is that the first thing that we should be asking people before anything else, before giving them a list, is saying, who do you know? Who do you know? It's the question that we never ask, but we should be asking before anything else, because that changes the entire trajectory of the campaign. So why is it that we are not doing this already? Well, there's a couple answers to this question, right? Because you say, like, this is so effective. Shouldn't everybody in the country be doing this, right? First off, we are doing it. We have been doing it for years, for centuries even. Every time somebody have a list of a few people they know, and they always call them and remind them to vote. I've talked to lots of people who do this. People do reach out to their friends and their family members. But the difference is we aren't doing it in a coordinated way. I don't know who you're reaching out to, and so I end up knocking on those same doors. I have another volunteer call them as a cold call, even though that's your friend. And so we're doing it, but in a scattered way, with lots and lots of different individuals not being part of a coordinated strategy. The second answer why we're not doing it is, to be honest, it's hard. It's a lot easier to just give people one list and send them out than it is to do all of these steps that we're going to talk about today in a strategy. There's many steps, and honestly, it requires follow-up, and it has real accountability. But it will also tell you, if you do this kind of program, you will know well before election day how far ahead or behind you are, based on real results, real people talking to you, not just a poll and not just the amount of money raised, but actual people who are going to vote. And then the last thing, and this honestly applies, there's a lot of people here who are consultants, some people who are candidates or officials. It's hard for us to figure out the industry. There's no commission. If you buy a lot of ads, if you buy a lot of mailers, or even if you just buy a lot of paid canvassing hours, you can charge a commission for that. How do you charge a commission on volunteer time? It's difficult to work with, because really what we're doing is we're training volunteers. We're teaching people to fish. And so it's hard to come up with a payment structure for this. But I would also argue, when we're doing paid canvassing, there's a better way to use our paid canvassing dollars as well. You can use those paid canvassing to do paid relational once you've done a volunteer program. So there are ways to do this, but it's difficult. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that everybody here at least has exposure to this, understands the tools, so that everybody can keep iterating on this and making sure that this becomes part of the lifeblood, part of the philosophy of how we do campaigns, and not just one technique. So with all that said, I told you we're not going to do one specific platform, but let's just go through a very simple example here. What does it mean to create a strategy for relational organizing? So I want to give you a town. This town is called Voterville. Now, there are 100 registered voters in Voterville, and the previous turnout for the town was 50%, which is actually higher than the turnout in Texas. The previous results, 30 red, 20 blue. So this is a 60% red town, right? Most people would say, oh, that's out of reach. Can this town flip? What would be an example of a strategy? What strategies would y'all use? Put your answer in the chat. What strategies would you use if you were going to try and flip this town from red to blue? Social pressure, COTV, grow the blue. These are all great answers. I would say that there's two main strategies, and of course, many gradients in between, but most campaigns, our basic strategy would be we raise enough money. So if I raise $1,000, I'm going to spend ads on those people, those red and blue people who are already voting, and we're going to try to get 6 of those red people to flip over to our side by hitting them with lots and lots of ads, right? Another way that we could win, a different strategy for trying to flip this town blue, would be to find 11 of those 50 people who didn't show up in the last election and just get them to show up this time. Just get them to show up. So how would that kind of strategy work? Trying to get to that green slice here in Voterville. Well, what would be the first step? First step for any one of these programs, we have to recruit volunteers. we have to recruit volunteers. And some people have asked me, well, where do you get all these volunteers from? And I tell them, well, that's kind of your job as the campaign, as the candidate, to inspire people. So this is a picture right here. This is actually one of my favorite pictures. This is a picture of me the day before early voting started in 2018. There's a room here of almost 2,000 people. But we didn't get there in one day. The very first day I started campaigning, I had 0 volunteers. I was literally just one person. But every single time we'd go out, we'd make sure we signed up volunteers, and then we would give them something to do immediately engage with those volunteers. So you have to grow your volunteer list. And by the way, for some of you that are running really small campaigns, you might say, how can I get enough volunteers for my campaign for drainage commissioner or school board or local city council? Well, sometimes we don't even think about the most important volunteers. The most important volunteer first is you, the candidate. Every single candidate is the most important volunteer. Your family, even your staff, especially if they're from that area. So let's say in this example of Voterville with 100 voters, you have a total of 2 volunteers, you and your spouse, right? So what would you do with those 2 volunteers? What would be the next step? Once you've recruited people who you know are going to be ride or die for you, hopefully you and your spouse are, what would be step 2? Step 2, you need to map out their volunteer networks. And I saw some people here in the chat talking about this, asking about everyone someone knows. To be honest, the specific way you do this can vary depending on the platform you're using, how big your district is, what voter file you're using. And honestly, this is one of the hardest things for us to do. A lot of people will do relational organizing. They'll teach it as a methodology, but the mapping of the volunteer networks, this is where the real power comes in, because what we want to do is we want to find out how many unique voters we can get to through our own networks. And in real life, it is very important to match these to the voter file, whatever list of voters you have. And it's a big difference between relational programs. Some platforms you can do turf cutting, but you can't do the network. Others, yeah, you can do the network, but you can't share content. And at the end, if people want to afterwards to follow up, we can talk about specific platforms. But to be honest, most volunteers don't know how many people they know. They have no idea how big their network is. And it's always bigger than they think it is. But places that you can start with the people who are in their phone. You can also look at the people who are in their Facebook friends, their Instagram, their TikTok, their email directories, a directory of people who go to your church or your temple. Or one thing that we did in my campaign is we actually gave people lists. If we had a group of immigrants, if we had a group of Gujaratis or a group of Vietnamese in our district, we would give them lists of Vietnamese people in their neighborhood. And guess what? They actually knew a lot of those people. So like I said, the number of people each volunteer is going to know will depend on that volunteer, the strength of their relationships, and the size of the district. But when the district was the size of Texas, we got an average volunteer size, and we were able to push an average network size over 100 voters per person in the state of Texas. So for this example with a Voterville, let's say you and your spouse are able to make a list of 10 people each, and maybe 2 of those people you both are in both of your lists. So we have a total of 18 unique voters. What do you do once you've marked out the 18 voters in Voterville that you and your spouse actually know? Well, the next step, once you've mapped out those volunteer networks, those voter networks, is to split your networks into your base and your turnout, your high propensity and your low propensity. And again, you know, this differs based on whether you're in a primary, a nonpartisan race, or a general election. But let's say in this example, of the 18 unique voters that me and my spouse marked out from the Voterville voter file, 10 of them are people who have not voted regularly before, right, in Voterville elections. 8 of them are. Some of them are other candidates. Some of them are officials. Some of them are activists, right? So those 8 people, those are our base. Remember, we talked about the number of base voters we had. We had 20 base voters already. The 10 extra people, those are our turnout. And so remember, I said base and turnout. I didn't talk about persuasion. And I'm not saying you can't do persuasion, but This program is fundamentally not about persuading people, flipping people. I'm not asking you to look for your crazy uncle. I have a crazy uncle who votes for Trump. I'm not asking you to flip them. If you can, more power to you, but that is not the best use of your time. I'm asking you to find people like my cousin who didn't vote once in her life until she was 38 years old. I'm not trying to flip her from anything. She's not voting for Republicans or Democrats. She's voting for nobody. I'm literally trying to nag her into showing up. And that's what I did 3 election cycles in a row. And we can talk about more strategies, the kind of things that you can say to your own contacts, your friends, your family members, your old classmates, people from your church, to nag them into voting. But the bottom line is that it's not about finding the right issue. It's about finding the right relationship. The reason that my cousin voted wasn't because of Trump. It was because I was asking. If I reach out to someone in my church, I'm not reaching out because they necessarily care about abortion the exact same way I do. It's because everybody in our church is showing up to vote. The relationship is the key, not the issue here. So once you've split into your base and your turnout, what do you actually ask the volunteers to do, right? And this is when you get them working. It's where the difference between a relational program and a traditional organizing program starts to become very clear. The stronger the relationship, the stronger the types of commitments that someone can get from their contacts, from voters. So with your base universe, those activists, the people who you say, you know what, I don't have to do anything. There's no point. A lot of you might be saying 90% of my friends are Democrat and they all vote every time. First off, that's not true. Once you start looking at their voting records, you would be shocked sometimes at some of your friends who didn't actually vote in the last election. I was shocked myself when I looked. But assuming that they are these high propensity voters, you want to get vote plans from them. Say out of those 18 people, we got 8 vote plans from those people, but one of them, they're an activist themselves. They're already out there. They say, you don't need to worry about me. Well, what do you want to do with that one person? You want to recruit that person, make them into a volunteer. Those are the people who are already really engaged, right? So we want to get their networks involved too. Now with the other people, the ones who we talked to, out of those 10 people, 4 of them, when we called them, when we texted them, when we saw them at church or temple, those people said, yeah, I'll vote. If 4 of those people, 10 people say they're going to vote, does that mean that we're done? Of course not. Those people will need to be contacted again by people that they actually know between now and the election. However, again, this is the big key. With a traditional program, we're talking about number of attempts, right? We're talking about how many times we're going to have to knock on this person's door, how many mailers we're going to have to send to them. With a relational program, that's not the question that we're asking. We're not asking how many times do I need to call my cousin or attempt her. We're asking who is the right person, because if you called my cousin, you could call her 100 times or send her 1,000 mailers and YouTube ads, but she would never come out to vote unless you get the right person with the right relationship. And then once you figure out who are the people that you need to turn out, who are your base, and you recruit your volunteers, that's when you can go back and you can start to look at the overall strategy. So remember what I said, previous results, 30 Republicans, 20 Democrats. We're saying our target win number for this election is 31 votes. And we've laid out this relational program. We have 2 volunteers. We found 4 turnout IDs, positive IDs, and we have 8 base voters with vote plans, right? So we have a total of 12 votes there. Now, hopefully this isn't too complicated math, but I'm just going to ask everybody here, put your answer, whoever wants to put in first. If I was able to get 12 votes, 8 base voters and 4 turnout voters from those 2 volunteers, how many total volunteers, or if you want to pay people to volunteer for you, paid community mobilizers doing relational, how many total volunteers would we need in order to win this election where our target win number was 31? Sam says 3 total volunteers. Does everybody agree with Sam? All right, Luis says 1. 4. Sorry, I didn't mean to make this into a math problem. So if you were able to get 12 votes with those 2 volunteers, what if we double that? What if we had 4 volunteers? At the same rate, we would have about 8 turnout IDs, and about 16 base vote plans. Is that enough? No, we would need, yes, Paula, you win a prize. I wish I could toss out candy here. You would need 6 volunteers who are all equally good as your first 2 volunteers. If you had 6 volunteers and each one of them would give you 2 turnout IDs and 4 base vote plans, then you have 36 votes. You've won the election, right? Now, this is the part where you update your strategy and your win number. So there's a couple different ways that you can get there, right? So from here, you could either just say, all right, I know I'm going to get 12 votes for my relational program, and I got to get 31 votes. So I need 19 votes for my ad program. I'm gonna use all the money I raise and spend on ads. Great. You could say, all right, now I'm gonna do my traditional door knocking program and just keep cold calling. Great. Or what else could we do? What else could we do? Well, one, we could go back and recruit more volunteers to be relational. In fact, we already did that once in the first step. We have one new volunteer, who we haven't trained yet, who could be bringing in their network. And in particular, when you're looking for those new volunteers, now you can update your strategy, because say in these 12 voters that we found with our first relational program, what if there was no Hispanic voters there? No Hispanic, neither me nor my spouse knows any Hispanic voters in Voterville. What kind of people do you think that we should look for if we're trying to recruit new volunteers to be part of our relational program? Probably you want to go out and find some Hispanic volunteers who maybe know more people in the Hispanic community. If we found that there was no young voters, maybe there's 20 young voters in Voterville and we don't know a single one of them, maybe we should recruit somebody from that age group. Maybe we should go to the local college or high school and see if we can recruit some of them who might know some of those young voters from Voterville. If there are people who have exhausted their entire list, I know 12 people. I've contacted every single one of those people in Voterville. They can go out and knock on doors, but what if instead of sending them out to a random turf, what if we looked at their own neighborhood? We circled their neighborhood. We gave them a home turf and said, you are responsible for these 5 voters who live closest to you. Not Craig, I'm not going to send you all the way on the other side of town. When I was a candidate, I got sent to different parts of town every time I would go out with volunteers. I'm driving an hour sometimes from one end of the district to the other to talk to somebody in a new neighborhood and then never talk to them again. Well, what if you assign people their home turf so that when they go through that neighborhood, even if somebody doesn't answer the door today, maybe they answer the door next time. Maybe they see you walking through the neighborhood. They see you with your dog. They see, oh, you drive the same kind of car I do. Oh, your kid goes to the same high school I do. And trust me, this actually does happen. Over time, people start to recognize that you're actually someone from the neighborhood. You're not a marketer who's just trying to show up at their door trying to sell them something. And that's why people don't open the door. But they recognize you. Or maybe they see you at the pool. Maybe they see you at the PTA meeting, right? So that's another way that we can bring in affinity groups, because your neighborhood is an affinity group. And then lastly, say you have some money and you can use it right now on paid canvassers. What do you think is more effective? Hiring somebody from the other side of town to come in and just knock on doors every single day in your neighborhood, or hiring somebody from the neighborhoods where you know the least voters? That's what a community mobilizer is. That's what a paid relational organizer is. You hire somebody, but you don't hire them from a random area. You hire those people from the community, from the places where you need the votes the most, because guess what? If they're from that neighborhood, they probably know people in that neighborhood. So that we could do an entire presentation on each one of these on its own. But the bottom line is that you want to use your relational program to update your own strategy. This isn't just a tactic or a technique. This is part of an integrated, coordinated strategy. And then the last part to it, this is the part where it gets really, really exciting, right? All your folks, they've built out their networks, you know. So Craig and his spouse together, they have 18 people. What do we do during early vote? During early vote, Craig tries to get out the base voters, the 8 base voters that he and his spouse actually identified, tries to get out the extra 4 people that told them that they were going to vote, nagging them. Every single day of early vote, assuming that you can get updated early vote numbers in your district, you want to update those numbers. So the platform often will do it for you, but you could do this yourself in Voterville. Update each one of those volunteers with how many of their voters have actually shown up to vote. And sometimes they will be surprised because they assume that their friends and family are going to show up on the first day and they never do. Update that leaderboard. Make it a competition between these volunteers so you can see how well people are doing at getting out their own folks, getting out their own network. And as opposed to a traditional program, in a traditional program, say we had 31 positive IDs, right? Say we knew that going into early vote, we had 31 positive IDs, we've knocked on all these doors, we had this massive volunteer program. And then only 15 of those 31 people have showed up by the end of early vote. What do we do in a normal campaign after the end of early vote in those 4 days or so between early vote and election day? We do everything again. We do everything again. We go crazy. We knock on every single door. We're like, oh, we got to get these people out again with strangers. We basically start the whole campaign over and we try to do it in 4 days. How is this different from that? This is different because if 15 of the 31 people that we had ID'd actually showed up, those other 16 people, they're not equal. I don't send Craig to this person and Craig's spouse to that person unless this voter was on Craig's list. If this voter was on Craig's spouse's list, if this voter was on my list, we know exactly which volunteer we need to chase and say, look, your cousin did not show up. You need to tell them, like, we are not going to hang out. I'm not going to see you at Thanksgiving unless you show up to vote this Sunday. Applying that social pressure that somebody mentioned there. That's what we do. And it's completely different. It's completely different than any other traditional campaign you've been part of because it is coordinated, it's strategic, and we know that this has the biggest impact because we've measured it before. We've measured it. When we compare a relational program to a traditional program, it beats everything. Relational contact, it beats phone banking, it beats volunteer door knocks, cold door knocks, it beats paid door knocks. It beats SMS campaigns. So we know that in Texas, for example, last year when we measured it, we got 5 times as many positive IDs per hour of volunteer time, and we spent 1/3 as much in terms of actual campaign dollars and resources in order to get there. One third per vote plan. So we know that this is more effective. We just have to do it earlier. And so when we talk about an effective strategy, the strategy itself takes iterations to do, but the things that a successful strategy will do for you, if you've done this right, if you worked with somebody who knows what they're doing, if you have experience, if you've done this cycle after cycle, successful strategy, and this is our last slide here, a successful strategy, it will increase voter turnout. We've seen that before. We've measured it before. B, it will deepen volunteer engagement. And the reason that happens, I don't know if anybody's had this problem before, but someone has done phone banking multiple times. My mom told me this. She would not phone bank for me, not because she doesn't love me, she does, but she said, I don't know if I'm actually helping you win the election here. And I told her, I was like, you know what, Mom, I don't know if you are either, because you never know once you talk to that person, unless you call that specific person again, whether they showed up to vote. Here, you have a specific list. You have obligation. You have responsibility. Each volunteer feels more committed. And trust me, that reinforcement, that positive reinforcement, when they see all of those people on their list all showing up to vote, it deepens their engagement. And then it makes them feel like their time was more valued because they weren't just a cog in a wheel, everybody interchangeable. Each one of them has a unique network. I cannot get out Craig's network. Craig can't get out mine. And so I feel more committed to the campaign. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but when you're doing paid canvassing, if you have a certain amount of dollars to spend to get somebody to reach out, you can use that more effectively. You can strategically target those dollars. You can hire people from the neighborhood. Begin voter contact earlier. This is extremely important. Everything else we do in a campaign, it becomes more important the closer we get to election day. So if you're going to do an ad, don't do an ad 3 months ahead of time. Do it 3 weeks or 3 days before election day, because it has a bigger impact. People forget about ads. People forget about a cold door knock. People forget about a mailer. This is the opposite. This is the opposite. You can start this now. In fact, if you're running in November of 2024, I say do this right now. In fact, even before that, do this the cycle before, because as we'll see in a second, it grows from cycle to cycle. You can start that volunteer engagement, that voter contact as early as you want, and it actually pays dividends over time because the strength of the relationship, you actually pull in more people. And so this is the inverse of everything else we do in campaigns. The earlier you start, the better, not the later. You can gauge voter sentiment. I don't know how many people here have done a big campaign, but in my second campaign, which was very large, we had multiple polls done. And the polls showed that we were spending our money right. The TV ads were working. Everything was going great. On election day, I thought I was going to win by 5%. You know what the actual results were on election day? We lost by 8%. 8%. And all I could say is, oh, I guess the polls were wrong. Because to be honest, we're taking these samples and we've seen the polls be wrong multiple cycles in a row. However, with this, we are gauging voter sentiment, real voter sentiment in the neighborhood, in our area, in our district. If you're going to lose this election, you should know a month ahead of time why, and you have time to adjust your message, right? And that comes to the next point. One of the biggest things that we worry about, especially right now with AI, is disinformation. Disinformation. People are going to get all sorts of messages. Then they'll get messages saying that you are a pedophile, you're doing sex trafficking, you're going to take away their job, everything under the sun. I worked on countering disinformation when I was a foreign service officer. I worked on it against Russia and Ukraine. And when I first started, I thought that the antidote to disinformation was information. Just give people good information, right? They'll see it, they'll say, oh, that's all wrong. No, that never works. It doesn't work. You can give people good information all day long, but disinformation is always more interesting. The only thing that counters disinformation is trust. Someone you know telling you, hey, that's BS. What are you talking about? A pizza parlor where Hillary Clinton runs a sex trafficking ring? That's ridiculous. The only person who can get through that is someone they know. And so this cuts through disinformation more than anything else. If you're a down ballot candidate right now, you're always worried what's happening at the top of the ticket. How do we coordinate? Has anybody ever been part of a coordinated campaign that wasn't coordinated? I've been part of several, and honestly, it wasn't even our fault. There was really no physical infrastructure to coordinate. When I was running with Beto O'Rourke at the top of the ticket and me underneath him, it would happen almost daily that his volunteers would knock on doors in the neighborhood and my volunteers would knock on the same doors in the same neighborhood because we had no way to coordinate. This is different. This allows us to coordinate automatically between campaigns because I can knock on the same doors as Craig, but I can't put Craig's cousin into my network. He can't put my high school classmate into his network unless we went to the same high school or we're in the same family. So this coordination happens automatically, whether you like the other candidates or not. Every candidate that participates in this kind of program, they can use their resource and their volunteers more effectively so that each one of you may not be able to win enough votes for your district, but together you all can turn out enough votes to win the entire slate. And that brings me to the second last point, reduce ballot drop-off. Has anybody ever said, tell people to vote down ballot, tell people to vote the whole ticket? We tried this with behavioral science. We tried lots of different approaches. We tried many different messages. It's bad to not keep voting. It's good to keep voting, all of these things. What was the one message that we could give to people that would get them to keep voting down ballot? The one message that actually worked was, look, Craig, I know you don't know any of these judges. In Houston, there was about 100 judges on the ballot. I didn't even know all of them. However, Craig, you know me. You know me. Craig, if you trust me, I need you to vote for all these judges. I need you to go all the way down to Zabrinsky at the bottom of this. And I need you to vote for every single one of those judges because I'm asking you to, Craig. That is the most powerful argument to get people to vote down ballot. And then the last thing, this is especially important for those of you who are working with multiple clients, or if you're a county party, or if you plan on winning your election and then running for re-election, is that this does not go away. If you knock on 100,000 doors this cycle, guess what? You're going to have to knock on all those 100,000 doors brand new next cycle and multiple times next cycle. However, if you grow your network now, you don't have to grow that network again. People who did this in my campaign in 2018 and 2020, some of them have done this 3 cycles in a row now. Now it's the easiest thing in the world. They just have their list. They go bam, 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 and they knock out their people. It becomes easier and easier. And so you can grow this network larger and larger every cycle, and you should. So I know that was a lot of content in 1 hour. We barely scratched the surface on lots of these. Each one of these topics could be a presentation on its own. But Craig, at this point, I'd like to see what questions people have about relational organizing.
Yeah, so far they've been dropping them in the chat, and we've covered most of it as you're chatting. If there are additional questions, just drop them in chat or drop them in the Q&A, and we'll call them out. As we're doing that, I have one question for you as you're covering this, Sri. We talked early on. Let me see if I could back up to an earlier slide and put this up here, right? So this was your red, green, blue slide here where we talked about putting a focus or a priority on the green and turning out some of those people who just were registered but didn't vote, right? I look at this model and I think of almost like a triage model, right? Like, there's going to be a certain base that's going to vote Democrat. There's going to be a certain base that's going to vote Republican, and you could look that up fairly easily through any of the voting tools, right? You can come to an understanding of, hey, this person has voted in every primary in the last 20 years. Chances are they're going to vote in this primary. Would you say that might even be a voter that you would deprioritize in favor of one of the people in the green area because there's such a high chance that they're going to vote, and then therefore have your volunteers dealing with their contacts, mostly making up some of those other categories?
So great question. Great question. So in November, we looked at this by quintile, by decile, meaning, top 10. So for those of you who are familiar with partisanship scores and turnout scores, let's say Craig is 90 plus on partisanship. He's the most Democratic person I know, and say he's 90 plus on turnout. It turns out in every single election, right? And you find the average turnout of that group, say it's 93%. Somebody goes on vacation, somebody their kid gets sick, et cetera. We looked at this to see, even among the highest group, like where they're the most Democrat and the highest turnout, does this have an impact? Yeah, because we had about a 7% drop off in Texas last year in November across the board. So those 93% average group was only turning out at about 86%, let's say. This program actually kept that up to the expected turnout level. So even among that group, it keeps people up to that level. On top of that, when you say deprioritize, it's actually a matter of reprioritizing, because we don't treat them the same. So when you get a text message saying, oh, we need you to show up and vote, Craig, you're looking at it and saying, like, come on, man, I already know this, right? If you are that person, if you're right now out knocking on doors, I'm not looking for you. I'm not treating you the same way as somebody in the green slice. What I'm treating you as a recruit, because Craig, I've been out there mapping out my networks. You may be knocking on a bunch of doors, Craig, but have you actually put your networks in the system? And what we found is that in Texas, at least, we have enough people who have volunteered for something, but they haven't done this in this concentrated way. And so everybody, those type of people that you're talking about, Craig, those are the base folks that we're talking about. You don't need to turn them out. What you need to do is you need to recruit as many of them as possible. If you can't recruit them, that's fine, as long as you get a vote plan. But what we will find is that some of those people will bring a giant network with them. And so they've just multiplied us. They've doubled our capacity. But B, some of those people that you were 100% sure were going to vote during early vote don't show up during early vote. But you don't know unless you map out your networks and you see exactly which one of those didn't show up. Does that answer the question?
It does. Yeah. We have a few more questions coming in. Let's see. So here's one from Ruth. When targeting non-voters, do you concentrate on the blue areas because they're more likely to support you, or do you go through the district to contact non-voters in general?
So the first thing I would do, remember, what was the very first step in this whole process? It was recruit volunteers, right? So the first thing you do is know who your supporters are. It's going to be a lot harder for me to go out to a new neighborhood, a new ethnic community, new age group where I don't have any support whatsoever. So start with your low-hanging fruit. Whatever your volunteers are, you're going to map those out. So it may be that you live in a very blue area, right? But I will tell you this, using Texas as an example, I will tell you the lowest turnout areas in Texas, lowest turnout congressional districts are all safe blue districts. They're all safe blue districts. The district that I grew up in, it's a pretty heavily African-American, Al Green's district. It's always very safe blue. You know what the turnout level is? 32%. 32%. We have tons and tons of votes to get from those safe blue areas. Now, if you don't have any volunteers in those areas, first map out the areas that you have volunteers with. First map out the communities you have volunteers with, and then you adjust your strategy. Remember, we get to that point where we look at what we have and we adjust our strategy and we try to target those areas. If you don't have any Black volunteers from that neighborhood that's turning out at 32%, that's your target right there. That's the area that you want to go to. Don't just show up in an area, say, I talked to the pastor, he says the whole community is going to vote, and I've done my job there. We need to look precinct by precinct. This isn't a district level strategy. This is a precinct by precinct strategy to figure out where we have more votes to get. And I got to tell you, the strategy needs to be adjusted based on what you have and what you need to achieve. But in order to do that, you have to lay out your goals ahead of time.
Perfect. Thanks. Hopefully that answers the question. Let's there are a few more coming through here. Let me We got a couple in the Q&A. Let me pull these out. Anne asked, specifically amongst non-voters, how do we know that they're not going to vote for Republicans? We have no vote history on them. Isn't a certain amount of persuasion at your volunteers' fingertips required?
Sure. So this is a great question, right? You know, a lot of times in Texas, we assume that all of those green people, we're going to get the majority of them. But the truth is, if they're in that green slice, I mean, especially if they're in that green slice during a general election. So let's talk about November of 2024, next year, right? If they're in that green slice, if they didn't vote in 2020, when Trump and Biden were on the ballot in the middle of the pandemic, they are not a Republican or a Democrat. They're neither. And a lot of times what we have found is the first person who gets to them. My cousin, I guarantee you, she would not have voted in 2020 if I didn't reach out to her. My cousin wasn't a Republican or a Democrat. When people say, what was it that got her to vote the first time? Was it Trump? Was it Roe versus Wade? Was it one of these other issues? No, because she doesn't care about politics. The only thing that got her to vote is me. And so what I'm doing is she's not opposed to voting for us, but I'm reaching out to get her to. And this is part of where the quality of relationship comes into play. If you know from talking to, say, I've heard like Craig make a few comments, about vaccine mandates or about how they're, the woke mob is doing something, but Craig doesn't have any voter history whatsoever. I've got to use my own judgment there. If I think that I can get Craig to show up and vote for my person, great. If I don't know anything about his politics, there's a lot of things that we can talk about the way that you talk to your friends, the way that you talk to your family members, the way you talk to people in your community. But at the end of the day, it's you and that quality of relationship. I trust you more than anybody else to be able to talk to people in your own community. If you need help, if you need talking points, the campaign can give you that. But what the campaign can't give you is that gauge of what is the relationship, whether you think you can be persuasive with this person or not. Does that make sense?
Let me grab does that make sense for the person who asked that question? I think it was Anne. Just pop in the chat if that's what you're looking for. If not, maybe you could expand a little more on the question. We have a few more questions. It's coming up on one, but I want to be sensitive to time, but we do have a few questions here. This one is from Louise. She asks, with 200,000 voters in the county, leaving out 150,000 Rs, it's astronomically difficult to organize. Many, many groups and candidates are canvassing and do not connect with the Dem Party for leadership. They do their own thing. Please explain some of the basics about organizing all of this data and communicating it to all orgs involved.
Yeah. So this honestly is the technically most complicated part. I didn't really go into it too much here because I wanted to get over the concept, but the truth is to do a network like we're talking about. So I think the district you're talking about is a county, but it's a county or a municipality, whatever the size of it is. If you want to create a network, you do have to have somebody on the team, a data scientist or working with somebody who's experienced like this to help you lay out the strategy so that you can keep updating those numbers and coordinating. The benefit though, I will say this, you have to sell this to people because people don't, if we could all coordinate naturally, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in. I mean, we do have these issues and part of it is because we are more diverse. We're not as homogenous as the Republican Party. We have lots of different communities, lots of different groups, and we're not all going to agree on everything. And a lot of times there's egos involved. But the biggest case that I would make to people is that if they join in with this coordinated effort, if they're willing to bring in their networks, they get more out of it than they put into it. Every single person gets more out of it. And that doesn't matter whether you're a small down ballot race or you're the top of the ticket. Say, you're running for county judge or governor or senator, right? Everybody benefits. And here's how. So say Craig is running for justice of peace and he has 2 volunteers, right? He brings together the network from those 2 volunteers. They've got, 20 or if it's a larger race, say 50 people between them that they know. However, the top of the ticket, the Senate race, the congressional race, whoever you can get to, they benefit from all of those different networks. Every single smaller candidate, all of the diverse candidates that we have that we don't leverage on the Democratic side, everybody benefits. So even if you don't want to coordinate, you are losing by not participating in a network like this with the other candidates. The technical part, you have to have a data scientist, somebody who can actually put this data together and help you target, and that's something that we can talk about and follow up. And Craig will give you my email and contact information. We can go through the technical specifics, but the hard part, honestly, like, you shouldn't be worried as much about the data science part. The part that we need to worry about is recruiting volunteers and getting more and more people to participate. The bottom line, the more folks who are active in this network, the greater chances of everybody winning.
Cool. We do have one or two, we have a couple questions and then a couple things in chat, but we're coming up on time. So I'm just popping up Sri's information here. Also, let me see if we have a poll. Usually we just launch a poll. I don't know if we have any here, but let's do it this way. Yeah, we don't have any polls. Put in the chat if you want to be contacted directly by Sri, or if you want to hear more from Sri about relational organizing, just drop your name in the chat and we'll be able to pull that. Generally what we do is within 24 hours, we're going to put together the deck, the video, and people ask for the chat transcript too. So just drop your name in the chat. If you want more information about this, just pop it in there now. I'll leave it open for another minute or two. And what we'll do is we'll pull that from the chat when we're done and make sure that Sri has your info and can reach out via email. You've also got Sri's info right here. You've got his email right here. So obviously feel free to contact him with more questions. There were a couple questions related to some of the technology that's used. There were a few other questions related to voter files and what is in the voter file and what is not in the voter file. And sometimes that's not a straightforward answer because it relies on Secretary of State in 50 different states and when they update. And I put a note in where I was in Allegheny County, they were releasing lists with 200,000 people every morning in an Excel file. And like if you don't have a supercomputer, it could be tough to open up an Excel file with 1 million people on it. I don't know why they use that format. It's kind of dumb in my opinion, but it is what it is. But so yeah, there's a lot of that kind of information there. But we'll get the info out in the next 24 hours via email. And I have everyone's info here now, obviously from registration. I'll make sure to get that over to Sri so he can reach out to you with answers to a few of these. We do have a few other ones, which I will send to you, Sri, and then we can answer them in the email, or you could answer them directly and we'll go from there. And
I just want to say, Craig, I don't want to sugarcoat this. There are a lot of really technical data issues with this, but that's not necessarily what you have to worry about. If people want to work with us, reach out to us at Relational Futures. We can help you set up a program, help you talk about the specifics of the technical platform, how you actually come up with these numbers and all of this strategy. But hopefully, at least we've convinced you of the concept that you can actually have a bigger impact by leveraging these relationships. And honestly, you're strengthening your own community. It's putting community organizing back into campaigns. That's what this is all about. And I really want to appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you all across the country. Thank you, Craig, for setting this up.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Sri. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Really appreciate your time. Give us about 24 hours. We'll wrap all this up and send it your way via email. And any other additional questions, just reply to that email. Sri will be on there and we'll go from there. Thanks again.
Thanks, y'all.
All right.